Chapter 1: A Brief History of the Chinese Language. Languages are complex creatures, and to try to understand them, we should always look at how they came to exist. First, it's important to clarify that while the prevailing language of China is called Chinese for simplicity's sake, this is actually a misnomer. On the one hand, what we know by the term Chinese language is in fact modern standard Chinese, 普通话, also called Mandarin. It was named after the word for official representative or Mandarin, and is a reminder of the historical fact that this particular language at some point became the language of the majority due to its role as the language of the imperial court. On the other hand, Chinese language isn't simply one language, but rather a collection of dialects spoken in different parts of China. This can sometimes produce some rather bizarre situations where a person coming from southwest of China isn't able to understand a single word spoken by a Chinese northerner, even though they both theoretically speak Chinese. Due to this linguistic diversity, the notion of Standard Chinese was established based mostly on the dialects of Chinese spoken in and around Beijing. Though for the cleanest version, you should head north of Beijing to the province of Heilongjiang and specifically to the city Harbin. Since Mandarin is the language used in official and educational institutions, it is widely used across all China, although, of course, the degree of fluency varies. For many, Mandarin is considered more of a second language, learnt alongside the local language of the area where they live. In Shanghai, for example, a large majority of the population could be described as bilingual. Shanghai variant of Chinese is radically different from Mandarin. Secondly, we should acknowledge the fact that the Chinese language is an ancient one, and while the first inscriptions in the Chinese language date to 3.5 millennia back, the language itself is certainly much older. We can only speculate how it sounded all those years back, although attempts have been made to shed light on that subject through comparative historical linguistics, especially relating Chinese to Japanese, Vietnamese, and Korean languages. In any case, scholars nowadays classify historical Chinese as old or archaic Chinese, common during the early and middle Zhou dynasty, 1122 to 256 BC, and Middle Chinese, the language used during the Sui, Tang, and Song dynasties, 6th to 10th century AD. Understanding the development of the language is of course inseparable from the development of the nation that spoke it, and dwelling into its history is beyond the scope of this book. So we would like to kindly instruct the interested reader to seek further information elsewhere, for example in a very condensed account by Raymond Chang titled Speaking of Chinese, A Cultural History of the Chinese Language. And so it wasn't until the 17th century that the country started to adopt a more unified stance on the language front, first with the declaration of Nanjing Mandarin as the official language, and then switching to Beijing Mandarin in the second half of the 19th century. Despite the fact that Mandarin was the official language back then, it's been used in the general population only hesitantly, with ordinary folks preferring to stick to their own mother tongues. Facing the issues of undereducation and illiteracy, the unified system of elementary school education created in the People's Republic of China, established in 1949, decided to kill two birds with one stone, doing it the Chinese way, adopting modern standard Chinese as its cornerstone. Mandarin is now spoken virtually everywhere throughout mainland China and in Taiwan, although Cantonese is still prevalent in the region of Hong Kong. And of course, there are also other linguistic relics out there, originating from a strong sense of national pride shared by Chinese immigrants. In many particular variants of Chinese are spoken nowadays in virtually every corner of the world by Chinese living abroad. For English speakers, perhaps the most baffling aspect of the Chinese language lies in its writing, and admittedly, it too has a fascinating story to tell. As linguists have discovered, the initial Chinese characters were pictograms, meaning they were simplified or symbolized pictures for objects, similar to Egyptian hieroglyphs. It's unclear as to when and why, but somewhere along the line, these characters transitioned to ideograms, pictures, or characters used for depicting words and phrases. The earliest examples of Chinese writing date to 15th to 10th century BC and are already quite complex, so the origins of first written Chinese script possibly reach way back, long beyond that. The earliest examples of Chinese writing date to 15th to 10th century BC and are already quite complex, so the origins of the first written Chinese script possibly reach way back, long before that.